the frame.
And so these current tanks, they have no technical rating there. There is no such thing as an approved sprint car tank for safety.
Let's get back to that. Yeah, let's get back to that. Is that like I told you, is this cell is SFI certified. To my knowledge, you cannot find a sprint car tank on the market that is SFI 28.3 certified because it does not meet the requirements.
So then what is it? So it's an outlaw tank, literally. It's just this is good enough, so we use it.
Well, I think it started with the industry had what they had. The standards started to come into play after the year 2000, and no one in the sprint car industry or the manufacturers have manufactured a tank that meets the SFI requirements, and so the industry has just accepted that the tanks aren't certified. And I don't think most racers know that current sprint car tanks are not SFI certified or would not meet the requirements. So item C in the rules is the only thing that really comes close to a technical specification or a requirement, right? That pertains to construction or safety.
Because it ain't saying it has to be this, that, or has to be inspected by an official, or must pass this, must have, it doesn't even say it must have 10, bolts in the damn thing. It just is pretty loose here.
Yeah, the one item there of cross-linked polyethylene plastic is actually an excerpt from the SFI 28.3 requirement. So although the tanks don't meet the full requirement, what some sanctioning bodies have done, and somebody at some point was aware of the SFI requirement, and they pulled an excerpt out of it or something like it, and they specified the type of polyethylene plastic that's also specified as a requirement for the SFI requirement. So they tried to take a part of it, even though they couldn't require that SFI certification was achieved, because no tank meets those requirements in totality right now.
So then why must it be this one piece construction based cell? What is is it just in that material in itself? Is that mainly because they're wanting it to be moldable? Because it is kind of like you said earlier, when they back them into the wall, it's kind of the softest hits they can take. Although I've heard differently. I've heard that's where you can get lower back injuries as well, but it seems like it's a little bit on the softer side of the situation. Is that the main idea behind it being that material?
Well, to be honest, I can't explain what the people were thinking, or even speculate what they were thinking when writing that rule. I think what they were trying to do is take parts of the SFI specification and use as much of it as they can, and this is a part of what the SFI certification calls for. So I think that there are I could argue that there are other construction methods that could be adequate, but so I guess I couldn't tell you what they were thinking when writing that rule. I don't necessarily disagree with it, but there are other ways. Now,
do you think it's to keep the traditional look, though? Because it would be, I would feel like that would keep that mold of the teardrop tail intact.
I don't think that's necessarily implied. For instance, my tank is constructed of a cross-linked polyethylene plastic. That's what the cell at the core of it is. No, that doesn't necessarily mean that it keeps the teardrop shape. Really, the shape, in order to have the shape that we've all grown to love in kind of a traditional sprint car tail tank, in order to do that, you really have to have the softer bladder, and then a molded geometric tank. And you can mold a thicker plastic that meets SFI requirements. In fact, FeelSafe has one, and they've tried to get it approved, and it hasn't been accepted. and I've seen their test results. They've done drop testing. They really like the tank, but it just has not been accepted.
Okay, so obviously we're looking at your tail tank here. Had you developed this tail tank prior to the obviously former Sprint Car Council member, not anymore? How did that become former, and had this been developed while you were there?
Well, it became former mainly because the Sprint Car Council in its current state really consists of series representatives, that being technical directors of the World of Outlaws, it was the All-Stars. I don't know if the High Limit's involved at this point, but it's really been reduced to basically series representatives. And so what started as a large group, where at the beginning I had expressed some interest and had some very good discussions within the council. And in the early stages, I was leading the car specification part of that, and we had started working on what potentially could have been the next generation sprint car. And then the industry or the council just took a different direction. And since what I was excited about and thought was good for the sport wasn't gaining traction within the council, I just took it upon myself to do it myself.
So basically, it became more of a segmented situation where it was like, let everyone kind of just control their own little satellite deals, and then we'll discuss what we could and cannot do. And I mean, was there any minds left behind that could actually take thoughts into creation? Because that seems to be the issue here in sprint car racing right now. And me being, I mean, I tell people all the time, advocacy is a very powerful tool that sprint car racing and its fans in particular don't use. Maybe they're just, too barbaric. I'm not sure. I call it traditionalists. But it seems like, there's a lot of reactive situations here. There's nothing that's proactive. That's why I was saying earlier, what's it going to take, or we were discussing earlier in the comments, what's it going to take? A Dell Sr. type moment? Is Kyle Larson going to have to, have a similar situation happen and land upside down, and then on that, while that's on TV or that happens, then everything has to change? Or are we going to be proactive when we can see those things potentially happening? Because, I mean, you let Larson strap into these cars, or any of these guys that you love right now strap into these cars, how they're designed and how they are made, the potentiality for that to be a reality is on the table.
Yeah, I don't think everybody maybe buys into the idea that there are unnecessary risks, and everybody has different risk tolerance. I'm a traditionalist. I love sprint car history, but that doesn't mean that we can't move the sport forward knowing what we know. And you bring up a good point. Does something really tragic have to happen? And I'll say again, because we've lost a lot of good people and good drivers. And use the analogy that's not racing. Here in Minneapolis, the Interstate 35 W bridge collapsed. And the day after that, the state of Minnesota thought it was a great idea to go inspect all the bridges in the state. Well, why was that not a good idea years prior? Do we have to wait for the tragedy to happen? No, we don't have to. We can use some forethought.
So, on this topic that seems to be the tail tanks, obviously we're looking at yours. Before we get into what yours is and how it operates, or its advantages and how it is, what is up with the current tail tank? I think one of the issues with the current tail tank, we got an image of it up right here. I think one of the dumbfounded things that no one cares to change, but I guess it's cool because it's traditional and it's fun, is that it's an impact point for the vehicle. Like, when these cars, these unbelievable monstrosity, fire-breathing literal machines, there are these vicious wrecks in sprint cars. They have that reputation for having these insane, eye-catching wrecks. That's kind of one of their, I don't want to say allures. For some fans, they are. We had to deal with one the other day who was in the living room. Not right now, but they love wrecks. That's why they go to sprint car racing. And the unfortunate situation here is that tail tank is an impact point of the wreck itself. So it's in a vulnerable position, and it's at the same time it's pointed as well. So it's almost like when you when you clip your foot on the door or something like that, it's the point of your foot that's catching it. You know, and that's the same kind of deal you have here with this tail tank. And like Andrew Bowman talked about, there's only so many clips on these tail tanks to keep them on the car. And then you have the argument that Donnie Schatz thinks they should be able to fly out the car, but then, you know, it's like, well, how do you contain the fuel and then the lines? And so go ahead and break down some of the flaws that you see with the current tail tank.
Well, first of all, address the idea that it is an impact point. Now, I think if you ask most sprint car drivers that in the instance when you don't have a fire or a rupture, a rear impact is actually the best impact because the energy is absorbed the best. The softest impact is actually backing the thing in the wall, even if it's at 100 miles an hour. It does absorb energy well. The problem is that there's a number of aspects. The reason this is difficult to solve, there's a number of aspects to consider. So first of all, one of the reasons that the tanks are rupturing now, and we're seeing ruptures like Paul McMahon at Knoxville a couple years ago, when they're full, these ruptures typically happen early in the race when there's no air volume and there's no room to collapse. So really the best case scenario with the current technology would be put a bigger tank on there, put a 33-gallon tank on there, and then fill it to 24 gallons and leave some air volume in there so that there's room to collapse. That would alleviate some of these punctures or ruptures. Probably the biggest problem, I think, with the design of these tanks is that they really are mounted in a very weak manner. They're just threaded inserts molded into a plastic tank, and they're just not strong enough. And there's knowledge that far exceeds that this type of design. We know how to build stronger mounts, but the industry or the sport just hasn't moved past it. So there's keeping the tank on the car, and we could debate, and we probably should, whether that's a good thing or not. And there's actually people on both sides of that fence. Like you said, I know Donnie Schatz says, or at least I've heard him say, I'm okay with the tank leaving the car. I'd say, okay. Might be okay with that as long as the fuel stays contained. But you're implying with the current fittings and plumbing that you're going to break a fitting, which means it's going to be pouring fuel out. And so then at that point, you're just hoping it's not pouring the fuel on you. So I don't think that's a good solution either. I think they should stay on the car. Then there's the puncture resistance. You could put a Nerf bar or a axle, anything through it. You want it to be puncture resistant. And then you've got the fact that the brake rotor is so close to the fuel cell. I'm not the first one to point that out. This is on all the chats. It's true. And so all these things need to be considered. And I think that when you just look at this design, you can see there's a lot to be desired in all these aspects. We can do better. And so really, I thought the only way to really get my ideas out there and make any progress is just to make an attempt to do it on my own. So I put some thought to it and built some.
Well, and another thing I was thinking about here when I'm just looking at it, would there not be some kind of way to put some style of a firewall or protective, because the other sad part about this is not only is the tail tank, the fuel cell right there on the impact point of the car, but sitting directly in front of it, like within a pinky's length, I mean, is the driver in the compartment, and it's just completely exposed.
That's true, too. Anytime you put a barrier in place, you have to realize that the barrier may perform how you want, meaning to create the barrier in the direction you want, but it also, if you're sitting in the wrong direction, could also create a barrier to stop fluid from leaving the driver compartment. Maybe I would cite the Doug Wolfgang scenario. It would have been nice to not have that belly pan in his fire situation so that the oil didn't pool. So you have to think about the unintended consequences, but it's a good idea. If you look at my design, which you probably will, you'll see that I did create a bit of a barrier so that fuel can't flow directly from the top plate. Don't know that angle, you can't really see it, but there is a bit of a barrier. Yeah. Yep, there's a bit of a barrier there, and then the window on the side of the tank is so that if you have any leakage of the car's on the side, it'll drain down the side. None of that's fail-safe, but it was just an attempt to be mindful of where the fuel could drain and where it could go under certain situations.
Okay, now there was some, obviously there's your design here, there's some people obviously in the chat rooms talking it up as well. You know, my deal is like the just general regulation of this is just insane. And back to what is an approved fire cell, you know, or fire tank system in these cars. I had a commenter, Jeff By, who's big into IMSA, IndyCar. He builds a lot of these cars, works on their teams. He says IndyCar, IMSA, GTP, LMP 2-3, F2, F3 all have a dry brake system. Fuel cell leaves the tub, the lines, and cell seal at the fittings. Not a cheap plumbing system, but much safer. This was presented 2 years ago to some sprint governing bodies with no interest. Unfortunately, it will have to be catastrophic before these types of changes are made, is what he's saying. Approved FIA fuel bladders should be required. All approved FIA fuel bladders are dated. Fuel bladders are epoxied, hence the dating system. Sprint car governing bodies will not enforce this due to competitor costs. So when people hear the phrase dry brake system, it's basically a controlled mechanism of like something is going to leave, and there's actual measures. Like if you want the tail tank to go, a dry brake system is basically like a fall safe of where it's going to brake under duress.
Yeah, imagine there's a breakaway force that's known, and at that force, the fitting breaks apart, and it's a dry brake with a seal. It's not a fracture. It's not a it's not a failure type break, but it pops the joint apart and keeps everything contained, like a quick coupler. So it keeps the fluids contained. Another aspect that I haven't completely bought into is a lot of people put their bypasses up on the top plate.
Yeah, and that's a new innovation, the pill system being up there for easy access.
Right, and I have a hard time with that. I think that's very easy to just simply break it off, and I don't know of any instances where that has happened. It just looks too vulnerable to me, so I haven't bought into that yet.
Okay. So what's the advantages on this design that you have versus the teardrop current system as far as impact is concerned?
As far as impact is concerned, so first of all, it will be far more puncture resistant in that it is SFI 28.3 certified, and it meets the puncture resistant requirement. And that's before the aluminum shell goes on it. So we add the shell, so the puncture resistance. But the mounting to the chassis is much stronger with the aluminum bar structure. So it's intended to be much stronger so that it doesn't rip off the car. And then the other thing is that you can see in this particular case, there's a lot more room. So the brake rotor, if the suspension breaks and the suspension collapses, unlike current sprint car fuel cells, the brake rotor is not going to thaw into the tank. It's not going to, because of the position. What you're looking at there is the 25-gallon version, purely rectangular. I think I also sent you some photos of the midget version, which is more L-shaped, and that's just another way to do it. But still, even that one has more room. There you go. Even that one has more room between the axle and the overhanging area.